Broadcasting from the beautiful state of Maine, welcome to another episode of the Learning from Leaders podcast, the show that focuses on identifying and developing the skills and behaviors that will inspire, empower, and compel others to follow your lead. Listen as Patrick's guests talk about the powerful leadership approaches they have identified and developed, which are vital for leading in today's challenging times. These are the same approaches that will positively impact you as a leader too. Learning from Leaders provides the right balance of leadership research with real-world scenarios, making it easy for you to rise above your best. All right, let's start the show.
Hey everybody, I'm Patrick Barno. Thank you for joining me on another episode of Learning from Leaders. And on this episode, we're going to talk with the author, Curtis Bateman, who's one of 4 authors on another book from FranklinCovey. And this one is on change. And the title of it is Change, How to Turn Uncertainty into Opportunity. And we are in a time of change constantly. This provides, through the use of a fable, the opportunity to look at different perspectives in terms of how do we show up and how do other people show up in situations where there is uncertainty. So many pearls that can be drawn out of this conversation and certainly through this book. So I hope you have an opportunity to read the book and listen to the podcast. Let's get into it. Curtis, thank you for being on the podcast today. The topic around change is something that we're dealing with so much today. And that's why I loved reading your book that's co-authored, and we'll get into that in a bit, but how to turn uncertainty into opportunity. I think it's something that we can all benefit from in this world, that if there's nothing that doesn't change, it's that everything changes, right? So thank you for being on the podcast.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thanks for reading the book. I'm looking forward to talking about it.
Yeah. So you start the book off as a fable, right? That's where this starts out, right? This idea of who rocked the boat. And it really weaves through, I think, some interesting things, right? Talking about what are the 5 reactions that we have to change, but also it talks about the 4 zones of going through change, which I found both very fascinating. So I wasn't sure where you might want to start in terms of that conversation.
Yeah, probably with an expression of gratitude, because the whole fable idea came from my years of working with Dr. Spencer Johnson, who wrote Who Moved My Cheese.
Yeah,
and
great book.
I loved it, and I got to spend a lot of one-on-one time with him, and it just helped me realize how important storytelling is as a medium to help people learn, mostly because you can leave a lot of white space for people to discover. And that's what we tried to do as I worked on the parable or fable, people choose different words, just trying to say what's enough in the story to prompt people to think and then learn from the white space that's there. And I'm glad you liked it. We've had a lot of people react really well to it. It's been translated in 4 or 5 languages already, and it's fun to see it start to grow.
Well, it is. It's one of those areas where you're able to insert yourself into those characters and think like, how would I operate like this? Or so whether it's move or minimize or wait or resist or quit, right? Which one am I? And as I was reading through these, I was also thinking, I was trying to put them with personality types as well. Like, what type of personality is this person based on this style?
I hope you figured it all out.
Did not.
Yeah, we spent so much work on those characters' names. And you think, oh, really, they're just one-word names. But we spent so much work to not have it be constraining and to say every one of those is a reaction to change. They're fairly common. And it's contextual. A personal change, I might behave like move. And in a professional change where I feel like something's happening to me, I might be more like wait or resist. And so it's contextual, and it gives people just a chance to go read through the story over and over again and say, oh, what's different this time? What's different about where I am, and what can I learn this time going through the
Yeah. Now, let me take a step back from it, because the book is co-authored, right? There were 4 of you that sort of contributed to this. I'd be curious, how was that decision made? Like, how did the 4 of you say, look, I think we're the best suited to create the ideal book in regards to change?
What was the arm wrestling battle over that?
From a discipline standpoint.
Yeah, I think you'll know, and many of our listeners will know, that FranklinCovey is the organization connected with this. And so when FranklinCovey gets involved in writing a book, there is a fairly intentional thought process. This is a space I've been working in for 20 years. So the basic model was work that I had started years ago. And as we looked at, okay, we're going to write a book and people want to talk to us about it, who are people inside FranklinCovey that have both experience in the space using this content and who are people that have capacity and talent and interest in it. And when you start to put all that together, you start to distill a group of people, you shortlist it, and then we talked about, okay, what could each person's role be? What's interesting is one of the things we wanted to do in the book is have each author have a voice. And so there was a lot of exploration around what could your voice be, and does that voice overlap or stand unique to you? And so in the book, Marche, one of the co-authors, has a deep connection to the personal impact around change. And so she has stories that are individual and personal in nature. Andy has a lot of executive and organizational context and school education. And Christy has an academic background. And so what we realized is the four of us lined up with very different viewpoints and experiences that gave more breadth and more scope to the book. And we felt like that would make it just more approachable by more people so they could see themselves or their circumstance in the actual book.
As I was reading that, again, I was thinking, especially as I got to the end, thinking there were so many different disciplines that sort of came into play, whether it was influence and getting people to buy in or understanding how people make decisions, right, to get them to want to go along with the change. And that to me was the part that was fascinating. And one that stood at the beginning, and I don't know whether it was Marche or whether it was Christy that mentioned John Cotter, who I love his work. And I think it's one of those models, his Cotter 8 especially, that doesn't really get very much attention. And it surprises me because I think it's such a powerful model in regards to change.
Yeah, that was Christy. And you're right. What I love is there are some great thinkers out there that have talked about change. Sometimes they talk about it from a process point of view. They talk about it from an individual point of view. Sometimes they talk about it from an organizational and structural point of view. And none of our work is meant to diminish or even replace that, but to say in all of that, there's a predictable pattern. And this predictable pattern has people that are involved in it. And those people, as they go through this predictable pattern, or teams or organizations, they're thinking, feeling, and doing pretty consistent things. And so how could we help them at each stage of those four zones that you're talking about? And in my view, Cotter's work, even Spencer Johnson's work that I mentioned, they all fit together nicely with this. I don't think any of them fight against each other. We just tried to give an overall framework. One of my experiences has been a lot of the works tend to focus on certain parts or a certain viewpoint. And we're just trying to give a framework that's big enough to embrace all of that and meet organizations and people where they are with the tools they have, and then say, how can we help you on the way?
Yeah. To that point, there was a section in there as I was reading, and it talked about really one of the mistakes that's made. And oftentimes it's to think about changes as just a process that needs to be managed. And I think that's to your point, is that I think that's a mistake that probably often is made is, where's my list? How do I get this done?
There's no doubt about that. I've experienced that. I've had companies that say, hey, we brought in this firm XYZ, and they gave us all this list and process and workflow, but it's still not happening. And that's because the hearts and minds of the people didn't come along on the journey. Doesn't mean the change was bad. Doesn't mean the work they did was bad. It left out one of the key stakeholders in the change, and that's all the people. And so we're just trying to add to that and say, if we focus on the people, we actually have a point of view that says organizations try and hire capable people. So let's unleash them rather than try and tell them what to do. Let's unleash their potential and give them an understanding of the journey they're on and see what they can bring to the equation to help make the change even more successful. That's where some of the opportunity emerges.
Now, with that intention, if you look at the majority of change initiatives, especially, fail.
Yeah.
Right? So from your perspective, is that something that you were going through saying that's the biggest piece of this is the people?
That's right. 75%, it depends on the data, the study you look at, 70, 75, 80% of change initiatives fail to reach their intended outcome. They make it somewhere. It's funny. We had a company we worked with that, as you read the model there, you go through the zone of status quo, the zone of disruption, adoption, and innovation. And this organization we were working with, they kept making it through the dip, the two most difficult stages. Then they just stopped every time because they were so tired and fatigued that they never actually got to a point where they were deriving any value from the change. They were just paying the price for every single change. And it's those kind of falling short that we wanted to help with and highlight, okay, here's where things are going wrong. Bring your people along, give them some tools and some resources, and let them help you create a lot more benefit from it rather than just surviving it.
Yeah. And when you talk about that too, I think the more times an organization goes through a type of change or brings a different organization in, the more difficult it is the next time, because people say, we've done this before. It doesn't work. We can't do the change. It almost works against you when you don't experience that success.
As you would imagine, we've done a lot of our own research on this, and 88% of people think that the change is going to lead to something worse for them. 70 to 75% of people believe the change will be less good for the organization. And Patrick, it's for the reason you just described. There is this experience bias that said, boy, I've seen this movie and it doesn't end well. And so you have this pattern that just repeats itself over and over again.
Yeah, it reminds me of work in healthcare around antibiotic treatments. And oftentimes you will hear people, if it's a 10-day course, you're always told, take all 10 days. Because if you don't, either the bacteria is going to come back, or worse, you're going to become resistant to it. And again, I see that same analogy in terms of what you're talking about in terms of changes, that we do just enough, some of the bad habits go away, and then we stop taking the medicine and it comes back. Or worse is that it comes back and what we tried before doesn't work anymore. We've now become resistant to it. And again, I think it's what you're speaking to there.
That's right. And if you apply the change model, that framework we talk about in the book, when you're in the depths of the change, in the zone of disruption and adoption, there's a tangible cost related to it. And so if you do what you're describing, you stop with the prescribed treatment, or you become a little bit immune to it, what you're doing is actually increasing the overall cost of the change. And imagine how punitive that is to organizations when they find themselves dealing with that negative cycle.
Yeah.
We're trying to be really clear and make it transparent that there is a cost there. And the point about the antibiotics that you raised is really interesting, because what takes people through the change is usually a vision of something better. There's a reason we're going through the change. We want a better outcome. The same is true with you want better health if you're taking the antibiotics, right? You want to make your health better, and then to stop short where you don't allow yourself to get the full benefit just leads to unintended consequences.
Yeah, I would fully agree. So when you talk about these in the fable, these 4 zones of change, you start out with the sort of status quo, which is we're just going down the river.
Yep.
What does that look like for organizations?
Yeah, it generally feels, you're hearing me use very intentional language there, feels, right? People feel comfortable. They know what to expect when they show up to work. It feels routine, right? As humans, we like predictable routines. They make us feel at ease. That minimizes the number of decisions we have to make. So in that zone of status quo, we feel like we're between changes. We feel like everything's predictable, understandable. We know what we're doing. And the risk there is it means we're not necessarily preparing for the next change. So the moment the change arrives, it can be quite alarming and disruptive to us. And so leaders, sometimes we might find that unintentionally, there's a complacency around change. There's a lack of preparation. And it probably feels good to people, though. Oh, man, this is so nice to have a little bit of a break from that last change. Remember how miserable that was? And the reality is it's probably doing them a disservice, because they're not, if you use a fitness or a training metaphor, they're not strengthening their muscles. They're letting them atrophy. And what you should be doing is taking that opportunity to develop a little bit of strength and capability and preparation for what will inevitably be the next change on the horizon.
Yeah. I love the analogy of exercise too. And there are times where I hesitate using that, because you don't know the crowd you're in, that some people don't like exercise. So
I know.
You make them more reluctant, but it's so true in regards to how do you build muscles? It's not through ease. It's through strain that you get stronger. If you just did 10 reps that were easy to do, you're doing 10 reps, but you're not getting any stronger in your group.
Yeah. For all of our listeners that don't like fitness metaphors, pick a musician that maybe between performances, you'll find that those that want to be experts at it, they still practice.
Yeah.
So that when the next piece of music, the next performance comes along, their fingers are well conditioned, their ability to, the calluses, whatever it is, the trumpet player, they're ready and at peak performance condition to do the next piece of music or performance.
Yeah. So you move in from that comfort stage to the disruption, right? Which is the waterfall.
Yeah.
We're going over the edge here. And then you're at this point, and I'm blanking on the term that we used or that you used between disruption and adoption, but it's a decision, right?
Yeah. It's called the point of decision.
Yeah.
Which is such an interesting space. I learned a lot about this particular point in the change process from the Who Moved My Cheese parable. This is really what made it clear for me. In the zone of disruption, everybody is individually trying to come to grips with, oh my goodness, what's changing? Why is it changing? And what's the impact on me? What's the impact on me as a leader, as an individual, on the organization? And you have to transition from figuring that out to saying, what am I going to do about it? And the point of decision says, okay, I get all the questions that I've been asking and I've got the answers and I'm comfortable with it. What am I going to do about it? And the hope is that we engage with the change and start to work through the zone of adoption where we're embracing the change. But in reality, not everybody does. If you look at an organization, some people opt out, and that's where quit and quits show up in the storyline saying, I don't think this is for me. I'm going to leave, or I don't think this is for me. I'm going to fight against it. Both have consequence. What's interesting, when quit jumps off the boat and leaves away from the change that's underway, that quit is initiating another significant change, but it feels better. So that's the point of decision. One engagement process is saying, I'm going to lean into this change. I like it. I can see where it's going. I'm going to make it work. The other one says, it doesn't work for me. I'm going to move away from it. In both instances, though, there's a decision to engage in a change.
Yeah. As I was reading that, I think, and I'm not sure the study that I had read it out of, but they talk about the same valley, but as the valley of despair.
That's right.
What I thought about when I was reading this, is this, because my guess is at this point, this is where disruption comes into play and people say, let's go back to status quo.
Yeah. Yeah. And when
easier to be where we were.
Without doubt, let's go back to where we were. I've seen this movie before. I know how it ends. Let's go back. And that just all contributes to that 75-80% of change initiatives that just don't reach their intended outcome. And the question then is, well, why in the world did we start the change in the first place? There had to be a reason for it. From a leadership point of view, what we find is if people want to go backwards, that means that we haven't created a compelling enough vision to engage their hearts and minds in the journey.
Along those lines, as we talk about the characters in this, are there certain characters at certain points that become more prominent?
There certainly can be. And I should say, these 5 reactions are the most common reactions that I've seen. It's not to say there aren't other reactions, but
sure,
most of them fit inside these common reactions. What we experience is, as a change is introduced, move tends to surface because they thrive on something new, either out of boredom or attention deficit or just enthusiasm for this is a long-awaited change. And so we always see move emerge early in the change process. And that's interesting. It's both good and bad. It provides a lot of positive energy in the direction of the change. It can also provide a lot of misguided energy because you don't know what you don't know yet. And so you can see that show up there. But other than that, I think the reactions are more about individuals. And in the zone of disruption, you can see all 5 reactions just based on the people that are involved in the process.
Yeah. Now, that said, in the book, you do a great job of speaking to what are the advantages of each of these reactions, and then what are the disadvantages? And we all have them, regardless of whether you're move. There are things that are going to benefit you in regards to that approach, but there are also downsides, which you just mentioned too. And I think for all of them, whether you're quit or resist or wait or wherever you are. And I really did appreciate that. That was a nice way to balance it, to say it's not this person is just bad on your team, that there are benefits.
Yeah, there's no right or wrong reaction. Hopefully what we're doing is raising awareness so that the reaction moves from being just a habitual reaction to an intentional reaction, saying what reaction is going to create the most value in this change process so that you lean in. I wanted to be really careful in the parable, not to paint any one of those reactions as right or wrong, but to give people space to say, in this context, here's how I'm reacting. So what are the strengths of that? And what do I need to watch out for? And the old saying that any virtue in excess can become a vice. And any one of these reactions in excess can become negative. And so it's trying to help people be really deliberate and intentional about this rather than just reactive.
And that was, again, back to when I was looking at those from the standpoint of personality. It's the same thing, right? Every personality style has its pluses and minuses, or where it doesn't suit us anymore or work for us. So it was interesting to look at that. As we're coming up the other side of this, we're into adoption, right? And the story goes on about figuring out how do we now navigate this ship back to a different location.
Yeah, we draw it as this smooth line when you look at the model, but we talk about it being probably the messiest, most difficult space where most changes actually fail. And that's because we know we want to do something different. We know there's a reason for it. We're actively working on it, and we're bound to have some things that just don't work.
Yeah.
And so there's this 2 steps forward, 1 step back at times. So sometimes we talk about it being a place where we need to recommit to our vision and work through the possibilities. And this is a difficult space for organizations. There's less tolerance for things that don't work. There's less resource for things that don't work. And sometimes there's some cost to it. And this is the space, though, where if we really want to start to activate creativity and innovation, where we have to give ourselves permission to try, to have it not work, to learn from it and figure it out. And then as we do that and we build momentum around that process of trying and learning, that's where we start to get into the advantage space and we move up into that 4th zone that we'll come on to in a minute. But this is the place where things start to fail because we're like, oh, that didn't work. Why didn't it work? Yeah. Let's go back to the way it was. And that's a mistake because most of the time we've been really clear around there's a reason we need to make this change. So it's important to recommit to that.
Yeah, I fully agree with that in terms of organizations as well, that they're mixed messages, right? We talk about this is a marathon and not a sprint, but we don't behave that way. So it teaches other people like, there's not a long runway here. I need results now. And so people change course too quickly, I think.
Yep.
And I do think that is a great point. One of the quotes in there was that it comes in waves. And I think just setting that expectation is really important to understand. This is not always going to go in a linear fashion that we're going to move in a positive direction. Let's prepare for there are going to be times where this is not going to go well.
That's right. And people should go read that story about the waves that Andy tells about being in the ocean, because it really is true. And it's important to recognize one of the things we believe really helps people is if you recognize that what you're experiencing isn't just unique to you in this moment, that it's part of the change process, then it feels a little less threatening. It's, oh, this is what's supposed to be happening. It gives you a little courage to say, okay, I can deal with this. I can figure out how to work through it.
Yeah. It's like mentally you prepare for it. So when it happens, you're like, okay, this is what we talked about. So that leads us to our 4th sort of stage here, right? Which is, to me, I think I love this stage right around innovation and what we decide to do with our ship at that point.
Yeah, this is unfortunately of the 4 zones, the zone that's least frequented by people and by organizations. And it's a shame because this is where so much of the benefit starts to emerge and materialize. And so we talk about how do you get into that zone, which is that process through the zone of adoption. But once you're there, how do you actually amplify all of the great things that you've started? And this is where you start to tell the story of the success so that as others listen to it, they can say, did you think about this? Or that's interesting. What did you consider when you were doing this? That kind of challenges our thinking and extends our thinking. It also gives us or moves us into the mindset of curiosity where we say, that worked. I wonder what would happen if, or what if we tried this? And in that process of getting curious and telling the story of your journey, it activates and unleashes more potential around the change. And the more of that you can do, the more benefit you create from the change, rather than declaring victory at the point where you're back to the same level of output. You start to explore the other what ifs and possibilities. And it's such a rich space to be in. And it's where when you talk to people that have had these miraculous change experiences, it's where they actually start to get a lot of creativity and the outcomes are amazing.
Yeah, I think of it in terms of resources versus resourcefulness, and that there are times where we're always going to lack resources, as the characters did. There were things that weren't going to go their way, but we all have equal access to resourcefulness, but people don't tap into it enough because they get shut down. That's not a good idea. We can't do that, or whatever reason, where you really open this thing up for real innovation to happen. It's this what if, right? Mm-hmm. And to me, that's all about resourcefulness.
Yep, that's exactly right. And once you've done it, I'm going back to an earlier point you made about this experience bias in organizations. Once you've had a change where your experience is, we did this amazing thing, or it led to this amazing outcome, it changes you. And it says the next time a change comes along, I don't start with that same experience bias. I start with, I wonder what this is going to lead to that could be amazing. And that's what we're trying to do, is help people start to shift that paradigm that they have.
Yeah. So as you were writing this, anything in particular that you became more aware of as you were writing it in terms of your own experiences?
That's a good question. As my co-authors and I talked about it, I suppose I've been working on this so many years, I thought this has just got to be obvious to everybody. And the thing that came back crystal clear as we talked about it, they would say, what about this? I'm like, oh, why don't people realize that? And I suppose the thing for me that I was really reminded of, the model, the methodology, the parable are all really straightforward to understand. But if you don't have those in your tool set, it can feel like this big moment, this big reveal. Whoa, I didn't even realize that there was this predictable pattern and that this is what's happening. And so I suppose I just loved being reminded after years and years of working with it, that in the simplicity, there's a lot of power that people can take from it. And they can use it with their teenagers. They can use it with their partner, their spouse, their friends. And it works, right? The framework works in every one of those spaces, personal and professional. And I was pleased to remember that. It helps you connect with why you do the work.
Yeah, I love that perspective. And again, I think you do at times, you probably get so close to it, you're involved in it for so long, you're just like, how come everybody doesn't understand that they're in uncertainty, there is opportunity? Because the toolbox hasn't been built enough to be able to do that, which clearly this book provides many opportunities to, I think, even refine the tools you have, but also add new ones as well.
That's right. We just provide a starting point for people. There are other tools that we have, and I'm sure other really clever people will read that and understand, oh, what if we did this here in our organization? It'd be really valuable. Hopefully we've left space for everybody to think that way.
Yeah. So as we're wrapping things up here, obviously people can grab the book off of Amazon. What other recommendations would you have if anybody that's in this space right now of, but we're going through something or would like to initiate something, we want to have it succeed and we haven't for a while? Are there opportunities aside from even the book to interact with you?
Yeah. So let me mention two. So the organization that supports all of this is FranklinCovey. We work with individuals and leaders to improve their capability and outcomes. And at FranklinCovey.com, you can learn about me and my co-authors where we could interact with you as speakers, or we have workshops that are on this as well, where we work on developing this capability. The other thing that I really is on my LinkedIn, if people look for Curtis Bateman, and you'll find me pretty easily on LinkedIn, I'm publishing articles on this 2 or 3 times a month, trying to just extend and add to it. So as I run into interesting conversations or I have a fun client experience, I'm trying to share stories or other key ideas that not every idea is in the book. And so other key ideas that might extend and help people think about it a little differently. So both of those are great resources. And hopefully you'll check out at least one of them, the book or one of those 2 resources, and get a little bit of insight into what's available in the change model.
So before we started this interview, you had mentioned that there were 5 leadership styles that didn't make it into the book. My guess is that going to be an area where people could probably read some articles interacting with you on that to plug?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. What we found over the years, me and different colleagues along the way, is that there are lots of leadership skills, but there are 5 in particular that have relevance in each zone, and how you use these skills in each of the 4 zones varies a little bit. And so I talk about that. But the 5 are vision, communication, alignment, engagement, and accountability. And those 5 leadership capabilities applied in specific ways in each of the 4 zones really are some of the key competencies that leaders can use to help advance the change. There's a lot that individuals can do too, and we talk about that in the book. But those 5 really play a prominent role in helping leaders be successful leading change. I write about that. If you go back on my LinkedIn a little bit, you'll see some earlier stories and posts on that, and more coming.
Perfect. And I'll make sure that all of that's in the show notes as well.
Great.
So, Curtis, I want to thank you for taking the time to talk about your book, Change. I really have enjoyed this. I've enjoyed reading it, again, in regards to just refining my skills, but also finding ways to add new tools to the toolbox. So thank you for that.
Perfect. My pleasure. Nice to talk with you.
Yeah, you as well. Good luck.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Learning from Leaders podcast. If you've enjoyed the show, please feel free to rate, review, and subscribe on your preferred podcast listening platform. We really appreciate that effort. Until next time, keep rising above your best as a leader.